The knife trembled in Lyra Ashwood's hand as she pressed it against her own skin, and somewhere down the hallway, footsteps were coming closer. She had maybe 2 minutes before someone found her locked door and started asking questions she could not answer. 2 minutes to finish what she had started, or the king she loved from a distance would be dead before the sun rose again. Lyra was 23 years old, and she had spent her whole life being the quiet one. The healer's assistant, who mixed medicine and wrapped wounds, and never spoke unless spoken to first. Nobody in Moonfall Pack expected anything remarkable from her. She liked it that way, most days. It meant nobody watched her too closely. It meant she could keep her secrets folded up small, tucked behind her ribs where no one could reach them. But 3 nights ago, everything had changed. She had been cleaning her grandmother's old chest, the one nobody had opened since the funeral, when she found a leather journal wrapped in cloth that smelled like dried lavender, and something older, something like burnt cedar. Inside, in her grandmother's careful handwriting, was a ritual Lyra had never heard of in all her years of healer training. A binding curse, not the kind that harmed, the kind that protected. A curse a person could carve into their own body, to tie their life to someone else's, so that if death came for that other person, it would have to go through the one who carved the mark first. Her grandmother had written a warning beside it, in ink so faded Lyra had to hold the page to the candlelight to read it clearly. This is not a gift. This is a sacrifice. Only carve this mark for someone whose life matters more to the world than your own does to you. Lyra had closed the journal that night and told herself she would never need it. She was a healer, not a warrior, and certainly not someone who mattered in the politics of packs and thrones. She went to sleep and told herself the journal was just old family superstition, nothing more. Then, the very next evening, she overheard something she was never supposed to hear. She had been delivering medicine to the eastern barracks when she passed an open window near the War Council chamber. 2 voices, low and careful, were speaking about the Alpha Ascension ceremony happening in 10 days. One voice belonged to a guard captain she recognized. The other she did not know. But what she heard froze her in place. They were planning to kill Alpha King Cade Ironwolf. Not in a fair challenge, not in an open fight between wolves the way pack law demanded a challenge to the throne should happen. They were planning poison, a blade in the dark, an accident that would look natural. They spoke of Lord Draven, the king's own uncle, as though he already knew, as though he was the one giving the orders. Lyra had pressed herself against the cold stone wall outside that window, her heart slamming so hard she thought the men inside might hear it. When the voices moved away, she ran. She did not go to the guards, she did not go to anyone in charge, because she did not know who else was part of the plot, and she could not risk being wrong about who to trust. That was 3 nights ago. Tonight was the night she had chosen to act. Cade Ironwolf did not know her name, not really. He had nodded to her once at a pack gathering when she handed him a cup of water, and that was the closest thing to a conversation they had ever shared. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair he kept short, and eyes the color of storm clouds before rain. He carried himself like a man who had never once doubted his place in the world, and maybe he hadn't, not until now. Lyra had loved him since she was 16 years old, and had watched him train in the courtyard below her window, moving through sword forms with a discipline that made the other young wolves look clumsy in comparison. She had never told a single soul. What was the point? He was promised to Seraphine, daughter of the Duskwood Pack, a union meant to end decades of tension between their 2 territories. Lyra was nobody, a healer's assistant with ordinary blood, and no title worth mentioning. But love was not the reason she was doing this. She told herself that over and over as she sat alone in her small healer's chamber that night, the door bolted, the curtains drawn, her grandmother's journal open on the table in front of her. She was doing this because a kingdom needed its king alive, because innocent wolves would suffer under Lord Draven's cruelty if he took the throne through murder instead of honor. She had heard the stories about Draven, how he treated the workers on his land, how he spoke about weaker packs as though they were pests, to be managed rather than people to be governed. If he became Alpha King, Moonfall would not survive as the place she knew. So she would carve the mark. She would bind her life to Cade's, and if death ever came for him again, it would have to take her first. The ritual required blood drawn by her own hand, from her own skin, over her own bone, spoken over with words that had no true translation, because they were older than any language spoken in the packs today. Her grandmother's notes said the collarbone was the strongest place for this kind of binding, close to the heart, close to the breath, a place that could carry a promise through every beat of a person's pulse. Lyra had already said the words 3 times, her voice shaking on each one. Now came the part she had been dreading. The knife had to draw the symbol itself, not just a cut, but a shape, precise and deliberate, while the final words were spoken aloud. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside her door. Someone was making their rounds, checking that all the healer chambers were locked for the night, the way they always were. She had maybe 90 seconds now. She pressed the blade tip against her collarbone and began to cut. The pain was sharper than anything she had ever felt while stitching another person's wound, sharper than the time she had broken her wrist falling from a training ladder as a child. She bit down on the folded cloth she had placed between her teeth beforehand, muffling the sound that wanted to escape her throat. Tears blurred her vision, but her hand did not stop moving. She had practiced the shape of the symbol on paper for 2 nights straight, until she could have drawn it with her eyes closed. Now her body remembered what her mind had rehearsed. The footsteps outside paused directly in front of her door. Lyra froze, knife still pressed to her skin, blood running warm down her collarbone and into the collar of her shirt. She held her breath. If whoever stood outside tried the door and found it locked at this hour, they might knock. They might call for someone to check on her. She could not explain fresh blood and a half-finished symbol carved into her own bone. The footsteps moved on. She let out the breath she had been holding and finished the final curve of the mark, whispering the last words of the ritual as the tip of the blade completed the shape. The moment she finished, a strange warmth spread through her chest, radiating outward from the wound like sunlight breaking through clouds after a storm. It did not feel like pain anymore. It felt like something settling into place, like a key turning in a lock that had been waiting a very long time to be opened. She dropped the knife onto the table and pressed a clean cloth hard against the wound, gritting her teeth against the sting. In the mirror across the room, she caught a glimpse of her own reflection. Pale skin, dark hair falling loose from its braid, eyes wide with something between fear and disbelief at what she had just done. The cloth came away soaked with blood, but underneath, the wound was already beginning to close at the edges, faster than any normal cut should heal. The mark itself remained, dark and permanent, a symbol shaped like 2 crescents facing each other with a single line connecting them, right over the bone. It was done. There was no undoing it now. Somewhere across the pack grounds, in the king's private chambers in the highest tower of Moonfall's Great Hall, Cade Ironwolf was likely asleep, unaware that a stranger he barely knew had just tied her own life to his. Unaware that if Lord Draven's assassins came for him tomorrow, or the day after, or on the night of his own ascension ceremony, something ancient and terrible would rise up to stop them, at a cost only Lyra would have to pay. She wrapped a bandage around her collarbone with practiced healer's hands, hiding the mark beneath her shirt collar where no one would think to look. Her fingers trembled the entire time, not from the pain, which was already fading faster than it should have, but from the weight of what she had just chosen. She thought about her grandmother's warning again. Only carve this mark for someone whose life matters more to the world than your own does to you. Lyra believed that about Cade Ironwolf with her whole heart, even though he did not know her name, even though he would marry another woman in a matter of months, even though nothing about this sacrifice would ever bring her closer to him, in the way she had once quietly dreamed it might when she was 16, and watching him train from her window. She was not doing this to be noticed. She was not doing this to be thanked. She told herself this again, as she blew out the candle and lay down on her narrow bed, her heart still racing, the fresh mark aching faintly under the bandage, like a second heartbeat layered over her own. Outside her window, the moon hung low and silver over Moonfall's stone towers, indifferent to the secret that had just been carved into existence beneath its light. Somewhere in the War Council chamber, men were still whispering about poison and blades and a throne that did not belong to them. Somewhere in his tower, the king slept without knowing that his life now depended on a healer's assistant he had spoken to exactly once. Lyra closed her eyes, exhaustion finally pulling her under, and her last waking thought was not of fear, but of a strange, fierce hope that she had just bought Cade Ironwolf more time than his enemies had planned for. She did not know yet how much that time would cost her. She did not know that within days, the king himself would notice a mark on his own skin that mirrored hers exactly, or that a sharp-eyed woman named Seraphine would begin asking questions no one wanted answered. She did not know that Lord Draven's plans had already moved further than she realized, or that the true danger was not the first attempt on the king's life, but the one still waiting, patient and hidden, for the night everyone would be watching the throne, instead of the shadows around it. For now, she only knew that she had done something irreversible, something her grandmother had once called a sacrifice rather than a gift, and that somewhere beneath the same moon, a king who did not know her name was about to become impossible to kill without her paying the price first. The wound beneath her bandage pulsed once, gently, like it was settling into its new purpose. Then Lyra Ashwood fell asleep, not knowing that her quiet, unnoticed life had just become tied forever to the fate of a kingdom. 3 days later, the first attempt on the king's life would fail in a way no one could explain, and the questions would begin. 3 days had passed since the carving, and Lyra Ashwood had already learned that carrying a secret this large felt like carrying a second body inside her own. She woke each morning with the mark on her collarbone aching faintly, a dull warmth that never fully went away, like a small ember tucked under her skin. She told no one. She wrapped it in bandages under her collar and went about her duties in the healer's wing, exactly as she always had, mixing tinctures, wrapping sprained wrists, listening to old wolves complain about aching joints before the rain came. Nobody looked at her twice. That was, she reminded herself, exactly how she needed things to stay. But her mind kept drifting backward, the way it always did when she was tired or afraid, back to the summer she turned 16, the summer she first noticed Cade Ironwolf, in a way that changed something quietly inside her chest. He had been 18 then, already broader in the shoulders than most grown wolves, training every morning in the courtyard below the healer's tower, with a discipline that seemed almost frightening in someone so young. Lyra used to wake early just to watch him through her window, while she ground herbs with a mortar and pestle, telling herself she was simply enjoying the morning air. She was not fooling anyone, least of all herself. She remembered the way sweat would catch the early sunlight on his forearms as he moved through sword forms alone, long before any other wolf in the pack was even awake. She remembered the single time their eyes met across the courtyard, just for a moment, before he looked away like she was nothing more than another face among the pack's many healers. She had told herself that moment meant something. She had been 16, and foolish, and lonely, in a way that made her invent meaning where there was none. By the time she turned 20, she had accepted the truth. Cade Ironwolf was the future Alpha King. He would marry someone with status, someone whose family could strengthen Moonfall's position among the other packs. That someone, everyone already knew, would be Seraphine of Duskwood Pack, a woman as sharp as she was beautiful, trained since childhood, in the kind of political maneuvering that came naturally to daughters of powerful families. Lyra had watched Seraphine arrive at Moonfall for the betrothal ceremony 2 years ago, dressed in deep violet, her dark red hair braided with silver thread, her expression calm and unreadable in a way that made the entire war council go quiet when she walked past. Lyra remembered thinking, with a strange mixture of admiration and quiet grief, that Seraphine looked exactly like a woman born to stand beside a king. Lyra was not that woman. She had never pretended to be. She had built a small, careful life around that fact, filling her days with healer's work and her nights with books borrowed from the pack library, telling herself that loving someone from a distance, quietly and without hope, was still better than not loving at all. She had never imagined that her feelings would one day lead her to carve an ancient curse into her own bone. The morning after the ritual, she had gone about her rounds as usual, delivering fever medicine to the western dormitories, checking on an elderly healer named Master Corwin, who had trained her since she was 12 years old. Master Corwin was one of the few people in Moonfall who actually looked at Lyra closely enough to notice things. "You're pale today," he said, squinting at her over his spectacles as she set a tray of tea beside his bed. "Paler than usual, and that's saying something, given how little sun you let onto that face of yours." "I didn't sleep well," Lyra said, which was true enough. Master Corwin studied her a moment longer, then let it go, the way he always did when he sensed a person did not want to be pressed. He had taught her the deepest truths of healing, how to set bones and brew fevers down and stitch wounds closed with steady hands, but he had also taught her, without ever saying it directly, that some pains a healer carried alone. She was grateful, that morning, that he did not ask more questions. She was not ready to explain, even to herself, what she had done. By midday, Word had spread through the pack that something strange had happened during the night watch. Lyra heard it first, from 2 young guards, gossiping near the healer's supply room, their voices low, but not quite low enough. "I'm telling you, the wine was bad," one guard said. "Turned sour, right there on the table, right in front of the king, before he even lifted the cup." "Wine doesn't just turn sour," the other guard said. "Not like that, not in an hour." "Well, it did. Captain Renner's furious about it. Thinks someone's playing tricks to make the kitchen staff look incompetent." Lyra had frozen behind the shelf of dried herbs, her pulse suddenly loud in her own ears. Poisoned wine turning sour before it could be drunk. It was such a small thing, almost nothing, the kind of strange accident a person might forget about within a week. But Lyra knew, with a certainty that made her knees weak, that it was not an accident at all. The curse was working. She did not know exactly how it worked, only that her grandmother's journal had described it as a binding that would sense danger approaching the protected person and act to stop it, in whatever way the old magic decided was most effective. A poisoned cup turning sour before it reached the king's lips was, Lyra realized with a strange mixture of relief and dread, exactly the kind of quiet intervention the curse might produce. It also meant the ache in her collarbone that morning, the one slightly sharper than the days before, had a reason behind it. The curse was drawing on something to do its work, drawing on her. She spent the rest of that day trying to act normal, trying not to flinch every time she heard the king's name mentioned, trying not to press her hand against her collarbone in front of others, the way her body kept wanting to do. It was exhausting in a way she had not expected, keeping a secret this size folded up small, while still doing her ordinary work, still smiling at patients, still measuring out doses of fever tonic with steady hands even as her heart raced beneath her ribs. That evening, walking back to her chamber after a long shift, Lyra passed the training courtyard and saw Cade Ironwolf standing near the eastern wall, speaking quietly with Captain Renner. She slowed her steps without meaning to, some old habit, from years of watching him from a distance pulling her attention, the way it always had. He looked troubled, his arms were crossed, his jaw tight, and even from this distance Lyra could see the tension in his shoulders that had nothing to do with sword forms or morning training. Whatever Captain Renner was telling him, it was not good news. She should have kept walking. Instead, she found herself standing a little too long, near the low stone wall that bordered the courtyard, close enough to catch fragments of their conversation carried on the evening breeze. "Second time this month something's gone wrong before it could reach you," Captain Renner was saying. "First the wine, now this business with the saddle strap nearly giving out during your ride yesterday. My lord, I don't believe in coincidence that convenient." "Neither do I," Cade said, his voice low and controlled, in a way that still managed to carry an edge of frustration. "But I also don't believe in phantoms protecting me out of kindness. Someone is doing this. I want to know who, and I want to know why." Lyra's chest tightened. He suspected something. Of course he did. Cade Ironwolf had not survived this long as heir to the throne by being careless or naive. A king who did not question strange good fortune was a king who would not stay king for very long. She made herself walk away before either man noticed her lingering, her heart hammering the entire way back to her chamber. That night, she sat at her small table again, her grandmother's journal open in front of her, searching the pages for any warning about what might happen if the person being protected began to investigate the source of their own protection. There was nothing written about that. Her grandmother's notes focused entirely on the ritual itself, the binding, the sacrifice required, the warning about only choosing someone whose life mattered enough to justify the cost. Nothing about what came after. Nothing about how to remain hidden once the curse began actively working to keep its chosen person alive. Lyra closed the journal and pressed her palm flat against her collarbone, feeling the faint warmth still radiating from beneath the bandage. She thought of Cade's tight jaw in the courtyard, the sharp edge in his voice as he told Captain Renner he wanted answers. She thought of Seraphine, calm and watchful, the kind of woman who noticed things other people missed. She thought, with a chill that had nothing to do with the cool night air slipping through her window, that hiding this secret might prove far harder than carving it into her own bone had been. Outside, the moon had risen high over Moonfall's towers, and somewhere across the pack grounds, Cade Ironwolf lay awake in his own chambers, staring at the ceiling, turning over the strange series of near misses in his mind, already beginning to suspect that something unnatural stood between him and whatever fate his enemies had planned. Neither of them slept easily that night, and neither of them yet knew how soon their two separate searches for the truth would collide. The following morning, a new mark would appear on the king's own skin, one that would leave him more disturbed than any failed assassination attempt ever could. Cade Ironwolf woke at dawn with a burning sensation on his collarbone, sharp enough to pull him out of sleep with a sound halfway between a gasp and a growl. He sat up in his bed, pressing his fingers against the spot, expecting to find a wasp sting or some strange rash from the herbs the healers had rubbed into a bruise on his shoulder the week before. Instead, his fingers found something raised and textured against his skin, a shape that had not been there the night before. He crossed the room to the polished bronze mirror, mounted near his washing basin, and pulled his collar aside, angling his shoulder toward the early light coming through the window. There, etched into his skin, as though it had always been part of him, was a mark shaped like two crescents facing each other, joined by a single straight line through the center. It was not a wound. It did not bleed or sting when he pressed a finger against it. It simply existed, dark against his skin, as strange and unfamiliar, as if he had woken up speaking a language he had never learned. Cade stared at it for a long moment, his heartbeat slow and heavy in his chest. He was not a man easily frightened. He had led hunting parties against rogue wolves twice his size, had faced down challengers in the fighting ring since he was old enough to hold a blade, had sat through years of political maneuvering among pack leaders who would gladly see him fail. But this, a mark appearing overnight on his own body with no explanation, unsettled him in a way none of those things ever had. He thought immediately of the strange incidents from the past weeks, the wine that had soured before reaching his lips, the saddle strap that had frayed and nearly given way during a routine ride, discovered only because his mount had shifted oddly beneath him at exactly the right moment, a loose stone on the tower stairs that had crumbled the instant before his foot would have landed on it, sending him stumbling but never falling. Every single time, something had intervened just before disaster could strike. He had assumed, at first, that these were simple coincidences, the kind of bad luck that sometimes clustered together before scattering apart again. But 3 incidents in 3 weeks, each one prevented by the narrowest possible margin, was not coincidence. Captain Renner did not believe it either, and Renner was not a man given to superstition. Now, a mark had appeared on his own skin, and instinct told Cade, with a certainty he could not fully explain, that this mark and those strange near misses were connected. He dressed quickly and summoned Master Corwin, the elder healer who had served Moonfall Pack for over 3 decades, and who Cade trusted more than most of his own war council. Master Corwin arrived within the hour, his spectacles perched low on his nose, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to sharp attention the moment Cade showed him the mark. "May I touch it, my lord?" Corwin asked. Cade nodded, and the old healer pressed 2 fingers gently against the shape, his brow furrowing, as though he was listening to something Cade could not hear. "This is old magic," Corwin said finally, straightening up. "Older than anything taught in the Healers Guild today. I have only ever read about markings like this, in texts locked away in the deepest part of the pack archives, texts most healers are never permitted to study." "What does it mean?" Cade asked, his voice tight. "It means, my lord, that someone has bound their own life to yours." Corwin's expression was grave. "This is not a curse meant to harm you. It is a curse meant to protect you, at a terrible cost to whoever carved it." Cade felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Explain." "The old texts call it a life-binding sacrifice," Corwin said, choosing his words with care. "The person who performs this ritual carves the mark into their own body, and in doing so, ties their fate to yours. If danger comes for you, the binding will act to protect you, drawing on the life force of the one who carved it. Every time it intervenes, my lord, it costs that person something: strength, health. In the most severe circumstances, if the binding is forced to give everything it has, it can cost them their life entirely." Cade's jaw tightened. "Someone is dying to keep me alive, and I don't even know who." "It would seem so, my lord. Why would anyone do this?" Cade stood abruptly, pacing toward the window, staring out over the courtyard where he had trained alone every morning since he was a boy. "Who would sacrifice themselves for me without even telling me their name?" Master Corwin was quiet for a long moment, adjusting his spectacles. "There are only a handful of reasons a person carves this kind of mark, my lord. Desperate loyalty to the throne itself, believing the pack's survival depends on your survival. Or, He paused, choosing his next words carefully. Love, deep enough that the person carving the mark believed your life mattered more than their own. Cade said nothing for a long moment, turning the old healer's words over in his mind. He thought of every face in Moonfall Pack, every wolf who had ever looked at him with something more than simple respect for his position. He came up with nothing. No one had ever confessed feelings toward him beyond the polite deference expected of a future Alpha King. His betrothal to Seraphine had been arranged years ago, and while he respected her sharp mind and steady judgment, there had never been anything between them beyond careful alliance. I need to find whoever did this, Cade said finally, before the cost becomes too great for them to survive. That may prove difficult, my lord, Corwin said gently. Whoever performed this ritual almost certainly did so in secret, and almost certainly does not wish to be found. The old texts suggest that revealing themselves defeats part of the purpose, at least in their own mind. They are protecting you. They may believe that remaining hidden protects you as well, by keeping you from feeling obligated toward them. Cade's frustration flared, sharp and immediate. I don't want to be protected by a stranger, bleeding themselves dry in the shadows. I want to know who they are, so I can stop this before it kills them. Corwin nodded slowly. Then I suggest, my lord, that you begin paying very close attention to everyone around you. Someone in Moonfall Pack is carrying a wound they cannot explain, and growing weaker in ways they are working very hard to hide. After Corwin left, Cade remained at the window for a long time, watching the courtyard below fill with the ordinary business of the pack grounds. Wolves crossing between buildings, healers carrying supplies, guards changing shifts along the outer walls. Somewhere among all these familiar faces was the person who had carved this mark into their own skin for his sake, and he had no idea who to look for. He thought again of the 3 strange incidents, replaying each one in his mind with new understanding, the wine turning sour, the saddle strap fraying at exactly the right moment, the stone crumbling before his foot could land on it. Each time, something had reached across whatever distance separated him from his unknown protector and pulled him back from danger. He wondered, with a strange ache he did not fully understand, what that pulling had cost them each time it happened. Later that day, during the midday War Council meeting, Cade found himself studying the faces around the long table with new suspicion, wondering if any of them held the answer he needed. Lord Draven sat near the far end, as he always did, his expression composed and attentive, offering measured opinions on border patrols and grain shipments, exactly as he had done for years. Cade had never had reason to doubt his uncle's loyalty before, though something about Draven's careful calm today made Cade's instincts prickle in a way he could not quite name. Seraphine arrived partway through the meeting, having traveled from Duskwood territory for a scheduled visit ahead of the upcoming Ascension ceremony. She took her seat beside Cade, with the same composed grace she always carried, her sharp eyes sweeping the room in a single glance that seemed to catalog every detail before she had even settled into her chair. You look troubled, she said quietly, leaning toward him as the council continued discussing grain allocations. More troubled than grain shipments usually make you. Cade considered for a moment, telling her about the mark, but something held him back, an instinct he could not quite explain, and he simply shook his head. It's nothing. A restless night. Seraphine's eyes lingered on him a moment longer than necessary, sharp and assessing, in a way that made Cade suspect she did not believe him for a second, but she said nothing further, turning her attention back to the council discussion, filing away his lie for later consideration, the way she filed away everything else. Across the pack grounds, in the healer's wing, Lyra Ashwood pressed a hand against her collarbone as a fresh wave of dizziness rolled through her, steadying herself against the supply room shelf until it passed. She had felt the pull again that morning, faint but unmistakable, the curse drawing on something inside her, though she did not yet know what danger it had just prevented. She did not know that the king now bore a matching mark on his own skin. She did not know that Master Corwin, the same man who had trained her since she was 12 years old, had just confirmed to Cade Ironwolf exactly what kind of magic now bound their 2 fates together. She only knew that she was growing tired in a way rest did not fix, and that the ache beneath her bandage seemed to deepen a little more each day. Seraphine of Duskwood Pack had never believed in coincidence, and she saw no reason to start now. She sat in the guest quarters given to her during her visits to Moonfall, a spacious room overlooking the eastern gardens, and turned over everything she had noticed since arriving 3 days ago. The king's strange evasiveness during the War Council meeting, the way Master Corwin had been seen entering and leaving the royal chambers twice in 1 week, an unusual frequency for an elder healer, whose duties rarely required direct attendance on the king himself, the faint shadow of exhaustion under Cade's eyes that had not been there during her last visit 2 months earlier. Something was wrong in Moonfall Pack, and whatever it was, the king was working very hard to hide it from her. Seraphine did not consider herself a jealous woman, nor a particularly romantic one. Her betrothal to Cade Ironwolf had been arranged when she was 19 years old, a careful political solution to decades of border tension between Duskwood and Moonfall territories. She respected Cade. She found him thoughtful in matters of governance, fair in his judgments, and honest in a way many pack leaders were not. She did not love him, not in the way songs described love, but she had built a genuine regard for him over their years of correspondence and occasional visits, and she had no intention of allowing some hidden threat to take him from her before their union could secure the peace both their packs desperately needed. She began, quietly and carefully, to investigate. Her first stop was the pack archives, where she requested access to any texts concerning unusual magic or ritual bindings, framing her interest as scholarly curiosity about Moonfall's history, in preparation for her future role as Alpha Queen. The archivist, an elderly wolf named Fenwick who had served the pack's records for longer than Seraphine had been alive, seemed pleased by her apparent interest, and led her to a section of the archives she had never visited before, shelves lined with texts far older than anything she had studied during her own upbringing in Duskwood. "Most of these have not been opened in decades, my lady," Fenwick said, running a careful finger along cracked leather spines. "Old healers' texts, mostly. Rituals and bindings from a time before our packs kept such careful written records of our laws. Master Corwin borrowed several volumes just last week, if I recall correctly." Seraphine's pulse quickened at that detail, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. "Do you recall which volumes?" Fenwick squinted, thinking. "Something about binding rituals, I believe. Old protective magic. Strange thing for an elder healer to be studying at his age, but Corwin has always had an interest in the older texts." Seraphine thanked the archivist, and spent the next hour searching through the remaining volumes on binding magic, her sharp mind cataloging every detail she found. Most of the text described minor protective charms, the kind woven into jewelry or clothing, offering only slight advantages in battle or health. But one thin, water-damaged volume near the back of the shelf caught her attention, its pages describing something far more serious. A life-binding sacrifice, the text called it. A ritual requiring the caster to carve a specific mark into their own flesh, binding their fate to another's, so that any danger meant for the protected person would instead draw upon the caster's own life force to prevent it. Seraphine read the passage 3 times, her stomach tightening with each pass. If this ritual had been performed on Cade's behalf, it would explain everything: his exhaustion, his evasiveness, Master Corwin's sudden interest in old binding texts, and his frequent private visits to the royal chambers. Someone in Moonfall Pack had bound their life to Cade's, and whoever it was, they were paying a price for it that grew steeper with each passing day. Seraphine closed the book carefully and sat back in her chair, thinking through the implications with the same cold clarity she applied to every political calculation she had ever made. If someone had performed this ritual out of desperate loyalty to the throne, it spoke well of Moonfall's people, though it was troubling that such sacrifice had proven necessary at all. But if someone had performed this ritual out of feelings for Cade personally, feelings deep enough to justify carving a death sentence into their own skin, that was a different matter entirely, one that touched much closer to Seraphine's own future than she was comfortable admitting. She needed to know which it was, and she needed to know soon. That evening, Seraphine sought out Master Corwin directly, finding him in his small study adjacent to the healer's wing, surrounded by his usual clutter of drying herbs and half-finished notes. He looked up when she entered, his expression carefully composed in the way of a man who had spent decades learning to hide concern from anxious patients. "My lady," he said, rising slightly from his chair, "what brings you to my study at this hour?" "I've been reading in the archives," Seraphine said, choosing her words with deliberate care as she took the seat across from him. "Old texts on binding rituals. Fenwick mentioned you had borrowed several volumes recently." Something flickered across Corwin's expression, quickly suppressed, but not quickly enough for Seraphine's practiced eye to miss entirely. Scholarly curiosity, my lady. An elder healer's mind wanders to old subjects sometimes. Does it wander toward life-binding sacrifices specifically? Seraphine said, watching him closely. Or is that simply where my own curiosity happened to lead me by coincidence? Corwin's expression did not change further, but his silence stretched a beat too long before he answered. I'm not certain what you mean, my lady. I think you understand exactly what I mean, Seraphine said, her voice gentle but unyielding. Someone in this pack has carved a mark into their own skin to protect Cade. I believe you know who. I believe you may even be treating them for the toll it has already taken. I am not here to expose anyone or cause harm, Master Corwin. I am here because I intend to marry this pack's future Alpha King, and I refuse to be kept in the dark about a threat serious enough that someone felt they had to sacrifice their own life to counter it. Corwin studied her for a long moment, his old eyes weighing something Seraphine could not quite read. Finally, he sighed, removing his spectacles to clean them with the edge of his sleeve, a habit Seraphine recognized as something he did when buying time to think. I cannot tell you who performed the ritual, my lady, he said finally. Not because I doubt your intentions, but because I gave my word to keep certain confidences within the healer's oath, and that oath binds me even to the future queen of this pack. What I can tell you is this. Yes, someone has performed a life-binding sacrifice on the king's behalf. Yes, it is already costing them a great deal. And yes, if the threat against Cade's life is not resolved soon, that cost will only continue to grow, potentially to a point from which they cannot recover. Seraphine absorbed this information in silence, her mind already racing through the implications. Does Cade know? He knows a mark exists, Corwin said. He knows what it means, in general terms. He does not know who carved it. He has been searching for the answer since the moment he discovered his own matching mark 2 days ago, my lady, with no success so far. Then we are both searching for the same person, Seraphine said quietly. For very different reasons, perhaps, but with the same urgency. Perhaps you are searching for different reasons, Corwin said, his voice carrying a weight Seraphine did not fully understand yet. Or perhaps, my lady, you will find that your reasons overlap more than you expect, once you learn the truth. Seraphine left the healer's study with more questions than answers, her mind turning over every wolf in Moonfall pack she had encountered during her visits, searching for anyone who seemed weaker, more exhausted, more burdened than they should be. She thought of the healer's assistants she had passed in the corridors over the years, quiet young women and men who moved through the pack grounds largely unnoticed by anyone above their station. She had never paid much attention to them before. She began to wonder if that had been a mistake. That same evening, in the War Council chamber, Cade Ironwolf met privately with Captain Renner to discuss a development that had arrived by messenger hawk just hours earlier, one that pushed the mystery of his unknown protector to the back of his mind, for the first time in days. Our informant among Lord Draven's household staff has confirmed it, my lord, Renner said, his voice grim. Draven is planning something significant for the Ascension ceremony itself, not another quiet accident like the wine or the saddle strap. Something larger, something meant to succeed, no matter what protections you might have. Cade's jaw tightened, his hand rising unconsciously to press against the mark on his collarbone, still warm and faintly aching beneath his shirt. How certain is this informant? Certain enough that I believe we must act, Renner said. Draven has been meeting privately with mercenaries from outside pack territory, men with no loyalty to Moonfall who cannot be traced back to him easily. Whatever he intends, my lord, he intends it to happen in front of the entire pack, during the one ceremony where you will be most exposed and least able to defend yourself amid the ritual formalities. Cade closed his eyes briefly, the weight of the coming days settling heavily across his shoulders. Somewhere in Moonfall Pack, an unknown protector had already sacrificed a great deal to keep him alive through 3 smaller attempts. He did not know if that protection, whatever its cost, would be enough to survive whatever Lord Draven was planning for the Ascension ceremony itself. He only knew that time was running shorter than he had realized, and that he needed to find his hidden protector before the largest threat yet arrived, both to warn them, and, if he was honest with himself, because he desperately wanted to know who had cared enough to bind their life to his without ever asking for anything in return. Lyra Ashwood knew something had changed the moment a royal guard appeared at the healer's wing and asked for her by name. She had been grinding willow bark for pain tonic when the guard, a young man named Colton, she recognized from the eastern barracks, stepped through the doorway with an expression of polite formality that did nothing to ease the sudden pounding in her chest. "Healer Ashwood," he said, "the king requests your presence in his private study. He asked that you examine something and give your professional opinion." Lyra's hands stilled over the mortar and pestle. Of all the healers in Moonfall Pack, Cade Ironwolf had never once requested her specifically for anything. She was the assistant, the quiet one, the healer whose name most patients forgot within days of their recovery. There was no reason for the king to ask for her by name, unless someone had suggested it, and she could think of only one reason anyone might suggest it now. "Of course," she said, keeping her voice as steady as she could manage. "I'll come right away." She untied her apron with hands that trembled slightly, wondering if this was the moment everything unraveled, wondering if Master Corwin had somehow guessed her secret and pointed the king toward her, without meaning any harm by it. She thought of her grandmother's warning in the old journal, the one about how this sacrifice was meant to remain hidden, how revealing herself might undo whatever protection the mark provided. She did not know if that was true. She only knew that walking toward the king's private study felt like walking toward the edge of something she could not see the bottom of. The royal study was smaller than Lyra had expected, warm with afternoon light filtering through tall windows, shelves lined with books on pack law and territorial history. Cade stood near his desk when she entered, his expression carefully composed, though Lyra's healer's eye immediately noticed the faint shadows beneath his eyes, the slight tension held in his shoulders that spoke of sleepless nights and mounting worry. "Healer Ashwood," he said, gesturing toward a chair across from his desk. "Thank you for coming." "Of course, my lord." Lyra sat, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. "Colton said you wished for me to examine something." Cade studied her for a moment before answering, and Lyra forced herself to hold his gaze, though every instinct screamed at her to look away before he saw too much. "I have a mark on my skin," he said finally. "One that appeared without explanation several days ago. Master Corwin has already given me his assessment of what it means, but I find myself wanting a second opinion, particularly from a healer with fresh eyes, who has not yet formed conclusions about what she expects to find." He pulled his collar aside, revealing the shape etched into his skin just above his collarbone, and Lyra's breath caught in her throat despite every effort to control her reaction. There it was, unmistakable. The same two crescents facing each other, joined by a single line through the center, identical to the mark hidden beneath her own bandage at this very moment. "Do you recognize this shape, Healer Ashwood?" Cade asked, his eyes fixed on her face, with an intensity that made her feel as though he could see straight through her carefully arranged composure. Lyra's mind raced, weighing every possible answer. If she admitted recognition, she risked everything unraveling immediately. If she denied it too convincingly, she risked seeming suspicious to a man who was clearly already searching for answers with sharp attention to every detail. She chose, in the end, something close to the truth, hoping vagueness would protect her where an outright lie might not. "I've read about markings similar to this in old healers' texts, my lord," she said carefully, "though I confess I've never seen one carved into living skin before. From what little I know, shapes like this are associated with old protective bindings, though I don't have detailed enough knowledge to say more than that with confidence." It was, she thought, close enough to true that her voice did not waver, though her hands remained clasped tightly in her lap, where he could not see them trembling. Cade studied her for a long moment, and Lyra forced herself to breathe evenly, to hold his gaze without flinching, though her heart hammered so loudly she wondered if he could somehow hear it across the space between them. "Master Corwin believes someone has bound their life to mine," Cade said quietly, his eyes never leaving her face. "He believes this person is sacrificing something of themselves each time danger comes for me, and that this sacrifice will only grow more severe the longer the threat against my life continues. I intend to find this person, Healer Ashwood, and I intend to stop them before the cost becomes something they cannot survive." Lyra's throat tightened, and for one terrible moment, she thought she might simply confess everything, right there in his study, the words rising up in her chest, like something desperate to escape. She wanted to tell him that she did not regret it, that she would do it again, without hesitation, that his life mattered to the future of this pack, in ways that made her own life feel like a fair trade. But her grandmother's warning echoed in her mind. The fear, that revealing herself might somehow undo the protection she had already fought so hard to create, and she forced the words back down. "That's a noble intention, my lord," she said instead, her voice quieter than she meant it to be. "Though I imagine whoever performed such a sacrifice did so because they believed your survival was worth more than their own comfort. Perhaps they would not wish to be found and made to feel indebted for a choice they made freely." Something shifted in Cade's expression at that, a flicker of something Lyra could not quite name, thoughtful and searching, in a way that made her wonder, with sudden alarm, if she had said too much. "You speak as though you understand their reasoning quite clearly," he said slowly, "for someone who claims only passing familiarity with this kind of magic." Lyra's heart lurched, and she forced herself to remain still, to keep her expression carefully neutral, even as panic threatened to close her throat entirely. "I only meant, my lord, that sacrifice freely given often comes with its own kind of dignity. Perhaps whoever did this would rather their choice remain their own, private and unclaimed, than have it turned into a debt you feel obligated to repay." Cade was quiet for a long moment, studying her, with an expression Lyra could not fully read, somewhere between curiosity and something softer she did not dare name, even in the privacy of her own thoughts. "Perhaps you're right," he said finally, though his tone suggested the conversation was far from settled in his own mind. "Thank you for your time, Healer Ashwood. I won't keep you from your duties any longer." Lyra rose from her chair on legs that felt unsteady, offering a small bow before turning toward the door. She had nearly reached it when Cade's voice stopped her. "Healer Ashwood." She turned back, her pulse still racing, dreading whatever question might come next. "Are you well?" he asked, his brow furrowed slightly, as he studied her face with an attention that felt entirely too perceptive. "You seem unusually pale today." Lyra managed something close to a genuine smile, though it took more effort than she wanted to admit. "Just a long week, my lord, nothing to concern yourself with." She left his study with her heart still hammering, her hands shaking now that she no longer had to hide it, and made her way back toward the healer's wing, on legs that felt entirely too unsteady for the short distance. She did not know how close she had come to confessing everything in that room, and the realization frightened her more than the conversation itself had. She also did not know that Cade Ironwolf remained in his study long after she left, turning over their conversation in his mind with growing suspicion, replaying the way her voice had softened when she spoke of sacrifice given freely, the way her hands had trembled in her lap despite her calm expression, the paleness in her face that Master Corwin had also mentioned once in passing, weeks ago, without either of them realizing its significance at the time. Cade was not a man who ignored his instincts, and his instincts were now telling him, with growing certainty, that the healer's assistant who had just left his study knew far more about the mark on his collarbone than she had admitted. He resolved, quietly and without telling anyone, to watch Lyra Ashwood more closely in the days ahead. Across the pack grounds, unaware of the king's growing suspicion, Seraphine of Duskwood Pack sat in her guest chambers reviewing a list of names Fenwick the archivist had helped her compile, a list of every healer's assistant currently serving in Moonfall's healer's wing. One name near the bottom of the list caught her attention for reasons she could not immediately articulate. Something about the timing of when this particular assistant had begun requesting extra medical supplies for her own private use, supplies that seemed unusually specific for someone who was not, according to the pack's health records, currently treating any wound of her own. The name on that list was Lyra Ashwood. Lord Draven had waited 11 years for this moment, and he did not intend to let a series of unexplained failures stop him now. He sat alone in his private chambers on the western edge of Moonfall's grounds, a modest but well-appointed suite befitting his station as the king's uncle, and studied the map spread across his desk showing the layout of the great hall where the ascension ceremony would take place in 6 days' time. Every entrance marked, every guard position noted, every moment of the ritual sequence accounted for down to the smallest detail. He had been patient. That was the quality Draven prided himself on most, the discipline that had allowed him to watch his older brother take the throne decades ago without complaint, to watch that brother's son grow into a capable and well-liked heir, all while quietly building the connections and resources that would one day allow Draven to correct what he considered a grave historical mistake. Moonfall Pack had been ruled by his brother's line for 2 generations now, and Draven had spent every one of those years believing, with a conviction that had only hardened over time, that he would have made the stronger Alpha King from the very beginning. The mercenaries he had hired were professionals, men and women from outside Pact territory, with no loyalty to Moonfall, and no traceable connection back to him. They understood the stakes. They understood the payment waiting for them once Cade Ironwolf was dead, and Draven ascended to the throne, in the chaos that would follow. And they had failed him 3 times already, each attempt undone by some inexplicable stroke of misfortune that Draven's own informants could not explain. Wine turning sour before it reached the king's lips. A saddle strap fraying at precisely the wrong moment for it to matter. A stone crumbling on the tower stairs a heartbeat before Cade's foot would have landed on it. Draven did not believe in luck, and he certainly did not believe that his nephew possessed some hidden survival instinct, capable of avoiding 3 separate, carefully planned mishaps through simple chance. Something was protecting Cade Ironwolf, and Draven intended to find out what, if only to ensure his final plan accounted for it. He had spies of his own scattered through Moonfall's staff, quiet servants and guards who reported small details back to him in exchange for coin, and it was through one such spy that Draven first heard whispers about the king's private meeting with Master Corwin, and the strange mark that had reportedly appeared on Cade's skin overnight. Draven had dismissed the rumor at first as servants' gossip, the kind of embellished nonsense that spread through any large household, but when a second source confirmed the same detail, and a third mentioned that Master Corwin had been seen borrowing old texts on binding magic from the Pack archives, Draven began to take the matter more seriously. He summoned his most trusted mercenary, a sharp-eyed woman named Freya, who had led similar operations in 3 other Pack territories before Draven had recruited her for this one, and laid out what he had learned. "Someone has performed a life-binding ritual to protect the king," Draven said, watching Freya's expression carefully across his desk. "That would explain everything. The wine, the saddle, the stone on the stairs. This kind of magic draws on the life of whoever performed the binding, using it to intervene against danger before it can succeed." Freya's eyes narrowed slightly, calculating. "Then our next attempt needs to account for that intervention directly, my lord. If this binding draws on someone's life force to protect the king, the simplest solution is to overwhelm it entirely. A single blade or a single poison can be turned aside by ancient magic, drawing on a stranger's strength. An attack large enough, executed at the right moment with enough simultaneous threats, may exceed what any single person's sacrifice can counter." Draven considered this, turning it over with the same careful patience he applied to every decision. The ascension ceremony itself then. The entire pack gathered in one place, Cade at the center of the ritual, vulnerable in ways he cannot avoid given the formal requirements of the ceremony. If we strike then, with enough force from multiple directions at once, whatever protection this binding provides may finally prove insufficient. "And if it does prove sufficient, my lord?" Freya asked. Draven's expression hardened. "Then whoever carved that mark will pay a price steep enough to end this problem permanently, one way or another. A binding this powerful cannot sustain itself forever without cost. If we press hard enough, the person behind it will either be forced to reveal themselves seeking help, or they will simply die from the strain of protecting a king who does not even know their name." Freya nodded slowly, already turning her mind toward the logistics of coordinating a larger, more complex operation within the 6 days remaining before the ceremony. "I'll need additional resources, my lord. More hands, better positioning within the hall itself. This cannot be arranged as quietly as the previous attempts." "You'll have whatever you need," Draven said. "This is the last opportunity before Cade formally ascends and secures his position beyond easy challenge. If we fail during the ceremony itself, we may not get another chance for years, if ever." After Freya left to begin her preparations, Draven remained alone in his study, studying the map of the Great Hall once more, tracing the ceremonial path Cade would walk during the ritual, marking new positions where his mercenaries could strike from multiple angles simultaneously. He thought of his brother, long dead now, who had never once considered Draven capable of ruling, who had passed the throne to his son without a moment's hesitation, despite Draven's decades of quiet service to the Pack's governance. He thought of Cade, capable and well-liked, exactly the kind of Alpha King the Pack's people had come to expect and admire, and felt the old, familiar bitterness sharpen into fresh resolve. 6 more days, and Moonfall would finally have the leader Draven had always believed it deserved. Elsewhere in the Pack grounds, unaware of how quickly the danger against him was accelerating, Cade Ironwolf spent the evening reviewing security arrangements for the Ascension ceremony with Captain Renner. Both men poring over the same layout of the Great Hall that Draven had studied earlier that same day, though neither of them yet knew how precisely their enemy had already mapped every weakness in their planned defenses. "We'll double the guard presence along the eastern entrance," Renner said, marking positions on the map with quick, decisive strokes. "And I want additional watchers stationed in the gallery above the main hall, where they can observe the entire ceremony without drawing attention." "Do it," Cade said, though his mind kept drifting back toward his conversation with Lyra Ashwood earlier that week. The way her hands had trembled, despite her carefully composed expression, the paleness in her face that seemed to grow more pronounced each time he happened to see her in passing through the pack grounds. He had not confirmed anything yet, had no proof beyond instinct, and a handful of small, easily dismissed details, but the suspicion had settled into him and refused to leave, growing sharper with each day that passed. "My lord," Renner said, drawing Cade's attention back to the map, "there is something else I should mention. My informant within Draven's household reports that the mercenary leader, a woman named Freya, has been seen meeting with additional hired hands over the past 2 days, more than were involved in any of the previous incidents. Whatever is being planned for the ceremony, it appears to be larger than anything attempted before." Cade's jaw tightened, his hand rising unconsciously to rest against the mark on his collarbone, still faintly warm beneath his shirt. "Then we prepare for the worst, Renner. Triple the guard if you must. I won't have this pack thrown into chaos, because we underestimated what my uncle is capable of." "And the mark, my lord?" Renner asked quietly. "The protection it's been providing? Do you believe it will be enough against a coordinated attack of this size?" Cade was silent for a long moment, staring at the map without truly seeing it, his mind instead on a healer's assistant with trembling hands, and a face too pale for someone claiming only a restless night's sleep. "I don't know," he said finally, "and that is precisely what worries me most." 6 days remained until the Ascension ceremony, and across Moonfall Pack, 3 separate parties were converging toward the same night, each unaware of exactly how the other's plans would collide once the ritual finally began. Captain Renner's informant inside Lord Draven's household nearly lost her life, delivering the final piece of proof they needed, and the price of that proof arrived at Moonfall's gates just 2 days before the Ascension ceremony, bleeding from a wound along her ribs and clutching a folded letter against her chest, as though it were the only thing keeping her upright. Her name was Ivy, a young servant who had worked in Draven's kitchens for the better part of a year, recruited quietly by Renner months earlier, when the first signs of Draven's ambitions had begun to surface. She collapsed just inside the eastern gate, and it was Lyra Ashwood, coincidentally passing through the courtyard on her way back from delivering medicine to the barracks, who reached her first. "Someone get Master Corwin," Lyra called out, dropping to her knees beside the injured woman, her healer's training taking over instantly, despite the sudden lurch of fear in her chest. The wound along Ivy's ribs was deep, clearly made by a blade, and blood soaked through the woman's dress in a widening dark stain. "Please," Ivy whispered, her hand closing weakly around Lyra's wrist as guards gathered around them. "The captain. Get this to Captain Renner. It's urgent. It can't wait. They'll kill him if he doesn't see this before the ceremony." Lyra took the folded letter from the woman's shaking hand and passed it immediately to one of the guards, ordering him to run it to Captain Renner without delay, before turning her full attention back to stabilizing Ivy's wound. She worked quickly, pressing clean cloth hard against the injury, calling for supplies, her hands steady despite her own racing heart, years of healer's training carrying her through the crisis, even as questions swirled through her mind about what news could possibly be urgent enough to nearly cost this woman her life delivering it. Ivy survived, thanks to Lyra's quick action and Master Corwin's skilled hands once he arrived minutes later. But the letter she had carried set off a chain of events that would reach every corner of Moonfall Pack before the day was through. Captain Renner brought the letter directly to Cade within the hour, his expression grim as he laid it across the king's desk. "My lord, this confirms everything we suspected, and worse besides." Ivy managed to copy details of Draven's full plan for the ceremony before she was discovered and forced to flee. He nearly caught her. She was wounded escaping his household grounds. Cade read through the letter twice, his jaw tightening with each line. The plan was more extensive than either he or Renner had anticipated. Draven intended to position hired mercenaries throughout the Great Hall during the Ascension ceremony, disguised among the pack's own guards and staff, timed to strike simultaneously from multiple directions the moment Cade knelt at the ceremonial altar to receive the formal blessing that would confirm his ascension. The letter named specific individuals already embedded within Moonfall's own guard rotation, wolves, who had seemingly served loyally for years, but had been secretly recruited by Draven, long before this final plot began taking shape. "He's been planning this for longer than we realized," Cade said quietly, setting the letter down. "Some of these names have served in my own guard rotation since before I came of age." "We can move against them now, my lord," Renner said. "Arrest the identified conspirators before the ceremony even begins." Cade shook his head slowly, his mind already working through the implications. If we arrest them now, Draven will know his plan has been discovered. He'll either flee before we can hold him accountable for what he's done, or he'll simply delay and try again through some other method we haven't anticipated yet. I want this ended completely, Renner, not postponed to some future date, when we're less prepared than we are right now. What do you propose, my lord? Cade was quiet for a long moment, staring at the letter, weighing the risk of what he was about to suggest. We let the ceremony proceed as planned. We quietly replace every guard named in this letter, with our own trusted men in the days beforehand, without alerting Draven that his people have been identified. We allow his mercenaries to believe their positions remain secure, right up until the moment they attempt to strike, and then we take all of them, including Draven himself, in the act of treason itself, in front of the entire pack as witness. There will be no question of his guilt then, no room for him to claim innocence or manipulate sympathy from the pack's other lords. Renner considered this, his expression troubled. That's a significant risk, my lord. If something goes wrong, if even one detail is missed, you'll be standing at the center of an ambush, with your guard rotation compromised. I know the risk, Cade said, but I also know that ending this quietly, through arrests before the ceremony, leaves too much room for Draven's remaining allies to claim persecution, to claim I moved against my own uncle out of paranoia rather than genuine treason. I need this proven beyond any doubt, Renner, in front of every pack lord who will be present for the ascension. Only then will this be finished completely. Renner nodded slowly, though his expression remained troubled. And the mark on your collarbone, my lord, whatever protection it has offered so far. Cade's hand rose unconsciously to the mark, still warm beneath his shirt, and his thoughts turned again, as they had so often over the past days, toward Lyra Ashwood, toward her trembling hands and pale face during their conversation in his study, toward the way she had happened to be present at exactly the moment Ivy collapsed in the courtyard, as though some instinct had drawn her there before anyone else even knew help was needed. He had not confirmed his suspicion yet. He had watched her carefully over the past days, noting small details that continued to align with his growing theory. The way she seemed to tire more easily than her duties should explain. The faint wince she sometimes suppressed when reaching for supplies on a high shelf, as though the motion pulled at something along her collarbone. The careful way she always kept her collar buttoned high, even on warm days when other healers in the wing had long since loosened their own clothing against the heat. He had begun to believe, with growing certainty, that Lyra Ashwood was the one who had carved this mark into her own skin, and if that was true, he intended to find a way to protect her during whatever chaos unfolded at the Ascension ceremony, even as the ceremony's true purpose was to protect him. I don't know if it will be enough against an attack this large, Cade admitted to Renner, but I intend to find out who has been carrying this burden before the ceremony arrives, so that whatever happens, they are not left to face the cost of protecting me entirely alone. That evening, Cade sought out Lyra directly, finding her in the healer's wing tending to Ivy's recovering wound, with the same careful, steady hands she brought to every patient. He waited until she finished changing the bandage before speaking, his voice quiet enough that only she would hear it in the mostly empty ward. "Healer Ashwood," he said, "I know." Lyra's hands stilled over the bandage roll, her entire body going rigid for a long moment, before she slowly turned to face him, her expression caught somewhere between fear and something that looked almost like relief, at finally having the secret acknowledged aloud. "My lord," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know what you—" "Please," Cade said gently, cutting her off, before she could attempt another denial. "I've watched you for days now. I've seen the way you favor your left shoulder, the way you keep your collar buttoned even in this heat. The way you appeared in that courtyard today at exactly the moment help was needed, as though something drew you there, before you even consciously understood why. I don't need you to confirm it with words, Healer Ashwood. I already know. I only need you to understand that I do not intend to let you carry this burden alone any longer. Not when a threat larger than anything we've faced so far is coming in 2 days' time. Lyra's eyes filled with tears she fought hard to suppress, her carefully maintained composure finally beginning to crack under the weight of days spent hiding a secret that had grown too heavy to carry silently much longer. I never wanted you to feel obligated, she whispered. I never wanted this to become something you had to worry about, on top of everything else threatening your throne. Too late for that, Cade said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it, directed toward her before. You bound your life to mine, Healer Ashwood. That means your well-being is now entirely my concern, whether either of us wanted it that way or not. Neither of them yet knew how quickly that concern would be tested, or how close the coming ceremony would bring them both to the very edge of what the ancient binding could survive. The great hall of Moonfall Pack had never looked more magnificent, banners of silver and deep blue hanging from every rafter. Hundreds of pack members gathered along the stone floor to witness the ascension ceremony that would formally confirm Cade Ironwolf as Alpha King in his own right, no longer merely heir, but ruler entire. Lyra stood near the back of the hall among the other healers, her heart pounding so hard, she feared everyone around her must surely hear it. She had begged Cade to let her stay away entirely, worried that her presence so close to danger might force the binding to act in ways that would drain her strength faster than either of them wanted. But he had insisted she remain within the hall, close enough that if something did happen, Master Corwin could reach her quickly with whatever aid she might need. She watched Cade walk the ceremonial path toward the raised altar at the front of the hall, dressed in formal robes of deep blue trimmed with silver thread, his expression composed and steady, despite everything both of them knew was coming. Seraphine walked a few paces behind him, as tradition required of his betrothed, her own expression carefully neutral though Lyra had noticed, over the past 2 days, the way Seraphine's sharp eyes occasionally found her own across a room, assessing and thoughtful in a way that made Lyra deeply uneasy. Captain Renner's carefully arranged replacements stood at every guard position named in Ivy's letter, wolves loyal to Cade wearing the uniforms of men who had been quietly detained that very morning, ensuring Draven's mercenaries would find their expected allies replaced by enemies the moment they attempted to act. Lyra did not know all the details of this plan, only that Cade had assured her the coming danger would be met, and that she should trust Renner's preparations to handle whatever came. The ceremony proceeded exactly as tradition dictated, the pack elders speaking the old words of blessing, Cade kneeling at the altar to receive the formal anointing that would mark his true ascension. Lyra watched, her breath held tight in her chest, waiting for the moment Draven's plan would surely be set into motion. It came just as Cade rose from his knees, the elder's final words still echoing through the hall. 3 figures near the eastern entrance moved simultaneously, throwing off cloaks that had disguised them among the ordinary crowd, blades flashing in the torchlight as they surged toward the altar. At the same moment, 2 more figures near the gallery above released ropes that sent them dropping directly toward the ceremonial platform, and Lyra realized with horror that this was no simple attack from a single direction, but a coordinated strike from 5 separate points, intended to overwhelm any single defense. Renner's replacement guards moved instantly, intercepting the attackers near the eastern entrance before they could close the distance to the altar, blades meeting blades in a sudden eruption of chaos that sent the gathered pack members screaming and scattering toward the hall's exits. But the 2 figures dropping from the gallery moved too fast, landing near the altar itself, close enough to Cade that Lyra's heart seized with terror. She felt the pull of the curse the instant the first blade swung toward Cade's exposed side, a sensation like something being torn violently from deep within her chest, and she cried out, stumbling forward through the panicked crowd, toward the altar even as her vision swam, and her legs threatened to give out beneath her. The blade meant for Cade's ribs turned aside at the last possible instant, deflected by nothing visible to the naked eye, and the attacker stumbled forward off balance, giving Cade the split second he needed to draw his own blade and counter. But even as that danger passed, Lyra felt the curse pull again, sharper this time, as a second blade arced toward Cade's throat from the other attacker's position. She screamed his name, though she did not know if he could hear her over the chaos filling the hall, and felt something tear loose inside her chest as the curse intervened a second time within moments, the second attacker's blade veering just enough to miss its mark, though the force of whatever magic accomplished this left Lyra collapsing to her knees among the fleeing crowd, her vision going dark at the edges. Around the altar, Cade fought both attackers with the skill of a man who had trained his entire life for exactly this kind of danger, Renner's guards finally breaking through to assist him as the remaining conspirators near the eastern entrance were subdued one by one. Lord Draven himself, watching from a shadowed alcove where he had positioned himself to observe his plan unfold without directly participating, realized within moments that everything had gone wrong, that his mercenaries were being overwhelmed rather than succeeding, and turned to flee before Renner's men could reach him. He did not make it far. 2 guards, alerted earlier that morning to watch for exactly this possibility, intercepted him near the hall's western exit, and Lord Draven's decades of patient scheming ended not in triumph, but in the humiliating grip of his own nephew's soldiers, dragged back into the great hall, in full view of every pack lord present, to witness his treason, confirmed beyond any possible denial. But by the time the immediate danger had passed, by the time Renner's guards had secured every conspirator, and the panicked crowd had begun to settle back into stunned, whispering clusters throughout the hall, Cade turned to search for the one thing that mattered more than anything else in that moment, and found Lyra collapsed on the stone floor, near the edge of the crowd, her skin frighteningly pale, blood seeping through the collar of her dress, where the mark on her collarbone had split open under the strain of protecting him twice within moments of each other.
Lyra!
Cade's voice broke as he dropped to his knees beside her, gathering her into his arms with none of the careful formality that had governed every previous interaction between them. Lyra, stay with me. Her eyes fluttered open weakly, finding his face above her, and she managed a faint, exhausted smile, despite the obvious pain radiating from the reopened wound on her collarbone. You're alive, she whispered. That's what matters. Not at this cost, Cade said fiercely, cradling her carefully against his chest, as Master Corwin pushed through the gathered crowd toward them, already calling for supplies, his old face etched with urgent concern. Not if it costs me you. Seraphine, standing frozen a few paces away, amid the chaos still settling around the hall, watched this scene unfold, with an expression that shifted slowly from confusion to a dawning, complicated understanding. She had suspected, over the past days of quiet investigation, that the healer's assistant named Lyra Ashwood held the answer to the mystery surrounding Cade's mark. She had not expected to see, in this single unguarded moment amid the wreckage of an attempted coup, exactly how much that healer's assistant meant to the man Seraphine had spent years preparing to marry. She said nothing, as Master Corwin knelt beside Cade and Lyra, working quickly to stabilize the reopened wound, his experienced hands moving with practiced efficiency, even as his expression remained grave with concern about how much strain the binding had endured in those few critical moments. Get her to the healer's wing immediately, Corwin said. She's lost more blood than her body can easily recover from on its own, and the binding itself has drawn heavily on whatever strength she had left. I need to work quickly if we're going to stabilize her. Cade lifted Lyra carefully into his arms without waiting for anyone's assistance, striding through the parting crowd toward the healer's wing, with an urgency that abandoned every formal expectation of how an Alpha King should carry himself in front of his assembled pack. Behind him, Renner's guards led Lord Draven away in chains, the conspiracy fully exposed, the immediate danger finally ended. But as Cade carried Lyra through the corridors toward the healer's wing, her breathing shallow and her face growing paler by the moment, he understood with a fear sharper than anything the failed assassination attempt had produced in him, that the true cost of tonight's victory might still be paid in the coming hours, and that cost might be a price he was not prepared to accept. Master Corwin worked over Lyra's still form for nearly 3 hours, while Cade paced the narrow healer's chamber, refusing every suggestion that he leave to address the aftermath of the failed coup waiting for him elsewhere in the pack grounds. My lord, Renner had said gently, appearing at the doorway sometime past midnight, the pack lords are asking for you. Lord Draven is secured, but there are questions about how this will be handled, questions only you can answer. They can wait, Cade said, not taking his eyes off Lyra's pale face, where she lay unconscious on the healer's cot, Master Corwin's hands still working carefully over the wound on her collarbone. Nothing matters more right now than whether she survives this. Renner studied him for a long moment, something understanding passing across his weathered features, before he nodded and withdrew without further argument, leaving Cade alone with Corwin and the unconscious healer, whose sacrifice had likely saved his life twice within the same terrible night. "The wound itself is not the greatest danger, my lord," Corwin said finally, straightening from his work and wiping his hands on a clean cloth. "I've closed it as best I can, and her body's own healing will manage the rest given time. The greater concern is how much the binding drew from her in those final moments. Intervening twice within seconds of each other is a strain the ritual was likely never designed to withstand so quickly. She is deeply weakened, my lord, more than I have ever seen in a patient who was not already gravely ill before their injury." "Will she recover?" Cade asked, his voice tight with a fear he had not allowed himself to fully acknowledge until this moment. Corwin hesitated, choosing his words with the careful precision of a healer who valued honesty over false comfort. "I believe so, my lord, given rest and time. But I will not pretend the coming days are without risk. The binding took a great deal from her tonight. Her body needs to recover that strength on its own, and there is little more I can do beyond ensuring she rests completely and eats well once she is able." Cade nodded slowly, moving to sit in the chair beside Lyra's cot, taking her hand gently in both of his own despite every instinct telling him an alpha king should not be found holding a healer's assistant's hand through the night with such open concern. He found, in that moment, that he did not care what anyone might think of the sight. "Why didn't she tell me sooner?" Cade murmured, more to himself than to Corwin, though the old healer remained nearby, quietly tidying his supplies. "Why carry something this heavy entirely alone?" "Because she believed your life was worth the cost, my lord," Corwin said simply. "And because, I suspect, she never imagined you would come to care about the outcome of that sacrifice, as much as you clearly do now." Cade said nothing, only tightened his hold on Lyra's hand, watching her chest rise and fall with slow, shallow breaths, willing her to wake, to prove to him that the price of his survival had not been too steep after all. She woke slowly, near dawn, her eyelids fluttering open, to find Cade still seated beside her, his own eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion and worry, his hand still wrapped carefully around hers. "You're still here," she whispered, her voice weak but clear. "Where else would I be?" Cade said, his voice rough with emotion he made no effort to hide from her now. "The ceremony," Lyra said, struggling to sit up despite Cade's gentle protest, memories of the attack flooding back through the fog of exhaustion clouding her mind. "Draven, the attack, is everyone." "It's over," Cade said, easing her back against the pillow with a gentle hand. "Draven is in chains. His mercenaries have been captured or scattered. Renner's men handled everything exactly as we planned. The only thing that still worries me, Lyra, is you." Lyra's eyes filled with tears at the sound of her given name, spoken without the formal title she had grown accustomed to hearing from him over the years of distant, respectful interaction that had defined their entire acquaintance until just days ago. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never meant for you to find out. Never meant for this to become something you had to worry about." "Stop apologizing for saving my life," Cade said, his voice firm, despite its gentleness. "Twice, Lyra. You saved my life twice in the span of a few terrible seconds, and it very nearly cost you everything. I don't know how to thank you for something that large, but I know I intend to spend considerable effort trying." Across the healer's wing, unnoticed by either of them in their quiet exchange, Seraphine stood just outside the doorway, having come to check on the healer's condition following the previous night's chaos, though her true reasons for coming ran deeper than simple courtesy. She had watched, through the partially open door, the way Cade held Lyra's hand, the raw concern etched into his face, the tenderness in his voice that Seraphine had never once heard directed toward herself in all their years of careful, respectful courtship. She stood there for a long moment, absorbing what she was witnessing, feeling something complicated settle in her chest, not quite jealousy, though perhaps something adjacent to it, mixed with a clarity she had not expected to find so suddenly. She had spent years preparing for a marriage built on political necessity and mutual respect, and she had told herself, over those years, that such a foundation was enough, that love was a luxury pack leaders often could not afford when territories and treaties hung in the balance. But watching Cade Ironwolf now, watching the way his entire being seemed focused on this one quiet healer's assistant who had sacrificed everything without ever expecting recognition or reward. Seraphine understood with sudden, sharp clarity that she had just witnessed something she herself had never experienced with Cade, and likely never would. She withdrew from the doorway before either of them noticed her presence, walking slowly back through the healer's wing corridors, her mind already turning over the difficult conversation she knew needed to happen, sooner rather than later, for the sake of everyone involved. That conversation came 2 days later, once Lyra had regained enough strength to sit upright and take short walks around the healer's wing, under Master Corwin's watchful supervision. Seraphine requested a private audience with Cade in his study, and Cade, sensing the seriousness in her tone, agreed without hesitation. "I've been thinking about our betrothal," Seraphine said once they were alone, her voice calm and measured in the way it always was, though Cade noticed something different beneath her composure this time, something that suggested careful thought rather than simple political calculation. "I've been thinking about it since the night of the ceremony, if I'm honest." "Seraphine," Cade began, though she raised a hand gently to stop him before he could continue. "Let me finish," she said. "I agreed to this union years ago because it made sense for both our packs, and I stand by that reasoning even now. Peace between Duskwood and Moonfall matters, and I do not regret the years we spent building trust between our territories, through our correspondence and our visits. But I saw something in that healer's wing 2 nights ago that I have never seen from you in all our time together, Cade, and I do not believe it would be honest of either of us to proceed with this marriage, while pretending I did not notice it." Cade was quiet for a long moment, weighing his words carefully, feeling a strange mixture of guilt and undeniable relief settle through him in equal measure. "I never intended for my feelings to develop this way," he said finally. "I did not choose this, Seraphine, not consciously, not until circumstances forced me to see clearly what had perhaps been building for longer than I realized." "I know," Seraphine said, her voice gentle despite the weight of what they were discussing. "I am not angry, Cade. I am, perhaps, a little sad for the version of this arrangement I had grown accustomed to imagining for my future, but I would rather step aside honestly now than build a marriage on a foundation I know to be incomplete, for both our sakes, and for the sake of the woman who clearly holds a place in your heart that I never occupied." "What will this mean for the alliance between our packs?" Cade asked, his mind already turning toward the political consequences, even as gratitude and relief flooded through him at her unexpected grace. "We will find another way to secure peace between Duskwood and Moonfall," Seraphine said, a faint, genuine smile touching her lips, for the first time since she had entered the study. "Perhaps through trade agreements, or through some other union between our families in time. I am not without options, Cade, and neither is Duskwood. This does not have to end in conflict between our territories, only in an honest acknowledgement that our paths, personally, lead elsewhere." Cade rose from his desk and crossed to where she stood, taking her hand in a gesture of genuine gratitude, rather than romantic affection. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for your honesty, and for your grace in this. I will not forget it, Seraphine, and I will ensure our packs remain allies regardless of how our personal arrangement concludes." Seraphine nodded, her expression settling into something calm and resolved. "See that you do," she said. "And Cade, take care of her. Whatever she gave up to protect you, make certain it was worth the cost." She left his study with quiet dignity, and Cade stood alone for a long moment afterward, feeling the weight of an old obligation lift from his shoulders even as a new, more uncertain future opened before him, one that centered entirely around a healer's assistant who had never once asked for anything in return for saving his life. 3 weeks passed before Lyra Ashwood felt fully like herself again, her strength returning slowly, under Master Corwin's careful supervision, the wound on her collarbone healing into a permanent scar, shaped like 2 crescents facing each other, joined by a single line through the center, a mark that would remain with her for the rest of her life, as a quiet reminder of the night everything had changed. Lord Draven's trial had concluded within days of his capture, the evidence against him overwhelming and undeniable in the light of Ivy's letter, the captured mercenary's own testimony, and the memory of dozens of witnesses who had seen the attack unfold with their own eyes during the ceremony itself. He was stripped of his title and his lands, exiled from Moonfall territory permanently, forbidden from ever returning, under threat of severe punishment. The mercenaries who survived the confrontation faced their own judgment before the pack's council of elders, their punishments determined according to Moonfall's laws regarding treason and attempted murder against the throne. Moonfall Pack, freed from the shadow of Draven's ambition, began settling back into its usual rhythms, though the story of the healer's assistant who had bound her life to the king's spread quickly through every corner of the territory, whispered first, in hushed, disbelieving tones, and eventually spoken openly, with genuine admiration, as the details became widely known. Lyra found the attention deeply uncomfortable at first, unaccustomed as she was to being noticed for anything beyond her quiet competence in the healer's wing. She had spent her entire life believing herself unremarkable, content to remain in the background while others carried the weight of leadership and recognition. Now, wherever she walked through the pack grounds, wolves who had never spoken to her before offered respectful nods, grateful smiles, quiet words of thanks for a sacrifice that had, in its own way, protected every single one of them from the chaos that would have followed Draven's successful coup. Cade visited her every day during her recovery, at first under the guise of checking on her progress as any concerned king might do for a healer who had sacrificed so much on his behalf, though it did not take long for both of them to acknowledge, quietly and without dramatic declaration, that his visits had become about something far more personal than simple gratitude. "You don't have to keep coming," Lyra said one afternoon, sitting in the small garden behind the healer's wing, where she had begun taking short walks as her strength returned, Cade seated beside her on a stone bench, beneath the shade of an old oak tree. "I'm recovering well. Master Corwin says I'll be back to full duties within another week." "I'm aware," Cade said, a faint smile touching his lips. "I still intend to keep coming, if you'll allow it." Lyra glanced at him, searching his expression for the meaning behind his words, though the warmth in his eyes left little room for misunderstanding. "Why?" she asked softly, needing to hear him say it plainly, rather than assume something she had spent years telling herself was impossible. "Because I have spent the better part of my life assuming my future was already decided for me," Cade said, turning to face her fully, his expression earnest, in a way she had never seen directed toward her before their fates had become so unexpectedly entwined. Arranged marriages, political alliances, obligations, chosen before I ever had the chance to consider what I might want for myself. And then a healer's assistant I had barely spoken to carved an ancient curse into her own skin, to protect a life she had no obligation to protect, expecting nothing in return, not even recognition. I have thought of little else since that night, Lyra, beyond how rare it is to be loved that completely, by someone who never once asked for anything back. Lyra's breath caught, tears rising unexpectedly to her eyes, at words she had never allowed herself to hope for during all those years of quiet, distant devotion. "I never expected anything," she whispered. "I only wanted you to survive." "I know," Cade said gently, reaching to take her hand in his own. "And that is precisely why I find myself unable to imagine a future that does not include you standing beside me, not as a healer working quietly in the shadows of the throne, but as someone the entire pack recognizes for exactly what she is, someone whose courage saved this kingdom before she ever wore its crown." Word of Seraphine's graceful withdrawal from the betrothal had already spread through the pack council, along with the quiet announcement that negotiations for a new trade alliance between Duskwood and Moonfall would proceed regardless, preserving the peace both territories valued, without requiring a marriage neither party's heart truly desired. Seraphine herself had returned to Duskwood territory with dignity intact, and rumors already suggested she had caught the eye of a neighboring pack's ambitious young heir during a recent diplomatic visit, a match that seemed, by all early accounts, far better suited to her own temperament and ambitions than her arrangement with Cade had ever been. The formal announcement came 1 month later, during a smaller, quieter ceremony than the chaotic ascension that had nearly cost both their lives. Cade Ironwolf stood before the assembled pack council and formally named Lyra Ashwood as his chosen mate, a declaration that defied generations of tradition, requiring political alliance over personal choice, though few among the gathered pack elders raised any objection, given everything Lyra had already sacrificed on behalf of their king and their territory. Lyra stood at his side that day wearing a dress with a modest, open collar, for the first time since the ritual, the scar on her collarbone visible for anyone who cared to look. No longer hidden beneath careful bandages and buttoned fabric, but worn openly as something she had come to understand, slowly and with growing pride, was not a mark of shame or secret sacrifice, but a symbol of exactly how far love and loyalty could carry a person willing to give everything for something they believed mattered. Master Corwin, watching from among the gathered healers with evident pride, leaned toward a colleague standing beside him and murmured quietly, "I trained her from the age of 12, you know. I always suspected there was more strength in that girl than she let anyone see." The pack celebrated long into the evening, and as the festivities wound down, Cade found Lyra standing alone near the edge of the gathering, looking out over the same courtyard where he had trained every morning during the years she had watched him quietly from her window, never imagining that her distant devotion would one day carry her all the way to his side, as an equal partner in ruling the territory they both loved. "Regretting anything?" Cade asked softly, coming to stand beside her. Lyra shook her head, reaching up to touch the scar on her collarbone, no longer hidden, no longer a secret burden carried alone in the dark. "Not for a single moment," she said. "I carved that mark believing your life mattered more than my own comfort, and I would make that same choice again without hesitation. I never expected it to lead me here, standing beside you as something more than a stranger you barely noticed. But I am grateful, more than I know how to properly express, that it did." Cade took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers, as they looked out together, over the courtyard, bathed in the last golden light of evening, the kingdom secure, the throne finally safe, and a future ahead of them that neither had dared imagine when a knife first touched skin in a locked healer's chamber weeks before. The mark on her collarbone would remain there for the rest of her life, a permanent reminder etched into her very bones. But where it had once been a secret, carved in fear and desperate hope, it now stood as something entirely different, a symbol worn with quiet pride by a queen who had saved her kingdom long before she ever wore its crown, and who had done so not for glory or recognition, but simply because she had believed, with her whole heart, that some lives were worth protecting no matter the cost.